born in Russia.
That's right.
Came here, where in Russia?
I was born 50 miles south of Smolensk,
yeah.
or 230 miles southwest of Moscow.
Came to the United States when you were how old?
3 years.
Yeah. Parents immigrated?
Oh, it was several years after the revolution. We came in 1923, and so my native language is English. I remember nothing about the Soviet Union.
And you wanted to be a writer very early?
11 years old, I started writing.
Yeah. First book published, what, about 1950?
Well, that was the first book published in 1950 when I was 30 years old, but I'd been publishing in the magazine short stories for 11 years before that. My first short story was sold professionally in 1938, so that I'm rapidly approaching my 50th anniversary as a professional writer, which isn't bad considering that I'm only a little over 30.
What you're going to tell the Congressional Clearinghouse and how you feel about robots and where is it all going? Put your telescope on.
Well, the importance of robots is that they're going to do the kind of jobs that human beings oughtn't to do because it underuses the brain. And yet human beings have had to do it because neither animals nor machines are smart enough. Now we've got computerized machines, robots, that are smart enough to do this work. The only trouble is that it means lots of people are going to find their jobs disappearing. And we're going to have a transition period.
Like whom? I mean, we know all about robots on assembly lines. That's the reality today. Forecasted 15 years, and who's going to lose their job because of
Well,
robot?
it seems to me that a great deal of the office work, the scut work in offices are going
Typing letters, doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, either that or be automated.
Yeah.
Servants, if any still exist, will be replaced by robots to some extent. And similarly, any kind of work that is repetitious and dull and doesn't really take much brains probably can be done by robots.
Are we going to run into real problems with labor unions and some real social issues about protection of people who've invested most of their lives with companies?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There's going to be technological unemployment. There's going to be a lot of resentment against robots. And I think that we're going to have to take into account the necessity of finding work for many people, retraining them, re-educating them. If it can't be done in some cases, then finding work anyway for them.
Any ethical questions with robots? Any other thing about the future that scares you?
Not with robots. I consider that robots is liable to be a very good thing for us if they're used properly.
But what about the possible abuse?
Anything
What could be the abuse?
Well, they can be used to do human labor, and the humans who had been doing it before can be thrown out in the street and considered, and not considered at all. And that could create a great deal of human misery.
An absence of respect for human integrity, for the dignity of woman or man.
Well, if we get to the point where we have no respect for labor, if labor is only something robots do, and then I think that might be bad. It still should be possible for human beings to work.
Isaac, what are some of your thoughts about the new frontiers of medicine with regard to genetic engineering, improving the race, and some doctors putting themselves in the position of playing God?
Well, my own feeling is that the greatest advantage that human beings have is the variety of the gene pool. In other words, I don't feel that one type of gene, let us say, is superior to another type or more desirable. I think you can't really tell what is superior or more desirable because these things change with circumstances. And what's important is to have a lot of variety so that when circumstances do change, something which previously was not important and which now has become important is still there.
Do you have writer's block?
Not so far.
Never?
Never.
355 books would suggest by definition there's no writer's block here.
However, I tell you, I switch from one thing to another. That is, I sometimes get tired of something I'm writing. Fortunately, I'm never without several projects in mind, so that if I wake up in the morning, I'm sick and tired of what I'm doing, I do something else. I take out pieces of paper and put in different pieces of paper. Someone once said, "What do you need to start writing?" And I said, "A typewriter within reach."
What time do you start writing? Get up in the morning and go right to it?
I'm an early morning person. I usually get to work by 7:30.
Yeah. And do you write for the entire day?
Well, I used to write till around 10 p.m. Old age is catching up with me. I tend to stop at 9 p.m. However, I'm frequently interrupted. I mustn't make it appear that I work 7:30 a.m.
You mean phone calls and
phone calls and the mail, and I have to eat, and my wife insists I talk to her once in a while, you know.
Someone said to, I guess it was Sir Laurence Olivier, why do you act? And he said, because if I don't, I'd go crazy. Is it the same way with writing?
Well, it's been suggested that since I can probably make enough by working half the year, why don't I relax the other half? And I said, well, I would, but just to pass the time away, do you mind if I write?
Are you a religious man?
No, I'm not.
Why not?
Well, the easiest answer is I wasn't brought up so.
Yeah, but I mean, you were obviously a very curious man, and you have an open mind about everything.
Oh, sure.
And so you investigated religion and came to the conclusion that?
No, I can't say I investigated religion with any particular interest, but I was interested in the Bible as a work of literature. And so I wrote a 2-volume book on that, but only as a work of literature, as one of the earliest, if not the earliest, serious histories we have. The Book of Kings, the Book of Chronicles, the Book of Samuel, and also as a repository of great poetry, probably the greatest poetry we have, certainly the greatest early poetry we have, and also as teachings of rather excellent ethical, ethical statements. The one thing that the Bible isn't, that some people seem to think it is, it's not a biology textbook, it's not an astronomy textbook. The first chapter of Genesis, the first couple of chapters of Genesis are the 6th century BC version of how the world might have started. We've improved on that since. I don't believe that those are God's words. Those are the words of men trying to make the most sense that they could out of the information they had at the time.
If we are so totally irrational, and always have been, why do you want to teach with rationality, the rational solution of problems, as the basis of what you do right?
For 2 reasons. In the first place, I have to live with myself. I feel that since I do appreciate rationality, I do believe I have a kind of ability to be a skeptic, to insist on evidence, to want things to make sense. I have the duty to say so, just as some people feel that they have the call to spread God's word. I believe that if there's such a thing as God's word, it's rationality, and I have the call to spread it. And secondly, even though I don't think I'll convert the world to rationality, I may influence an occasional person here and there. And every small addition to the sum total of rationality is precious. And I would like to be responsible for as many drops as we can possibly add to that small pond.
Well, let's enlarge the pond. Tell me what the motivation would be for someone to embrace the rational ethic that you relate to.
Well, for one thing, you understand the universe better. To believe in nonsense is really to limit yourself terribly, to live in fear of all sorts of things that don't exist. There are evils in the world, and there are dangers, but you might as well concentrate on those that really exist and not create them for yourself and try to live surrounded by these imaginary menaces. To be irrational gives you certain answers. Anyone would rather go to somebody who'll say 2 + 2 = 5, and there's no mistake about it, than to go to someone who says, well, modern scientific research says that 2 + 2 is usually 4, but we can't always be certain, of course. They'll go for the certainty, even if it's wrong. I am firmly convinced that the problems we face, all the problems humanity faces now, are global in nature. In other words, if the ozone layer is disappearing, it's disappearing for everybody, not just for Americans or just for Egyptians. With pollution, there's only one ocean, one atmosphere, and we're polluting it for all of us, whoever pollutes it. And there's no way in which we're ever going to solve these problems all by ourselves. No nation can do it by itself. The only way a sensible attack on these problems can be made is by international cooperation, a global effort. So I'm all for international cooperation. I'm against not only war, but I'm against the fact that the world spends $500 billion every year just preparing for wars which they don't dare fight. And that $500 billion that goes into weapons of war, into standing armies, into all kinds of chazarai, can't be used for anything else, and isn't. So that we're short on dough for things to combat acid rain, for instance. We can't figure out what to do about a host of problems because we're spending not only all our money, but all our effort and all our emotion on this useless thing of nation versus nation, which maybe destroy us all.
Is it possible that you suffer from an excessive trust in rationality?
Well, I can't answer that very easily. Perhaps I do, you know, but I can't think of anything else to trust in.
Do you think that we can educate ourselves, that any one of us, as you once said, at any time can be educated in any subject that strikes our fancy?
Well, the key words there are that strikes our fancy. There are some things that simply don't strike my fancy, and I doubt that I can force myself to be educated in it. Even if I try to read about it, it bounces off. On the other hand, when there's a subject I'm ferociously interested in, then it is easy for me to learn about it. I read it, I absorb it, I take it in gladly and cheerfully. I've written more books on astronomy than on any other science, and no one has ever complained that my astronomical books are wrong, silly, anything like that. I've never taken a course in astronomy. I'm completely self-trained in it. On the other hand, I've written relatively few books on chemistry, which is my training. I've got a PhD in chemistry. But I know too much chemistry to get excited over it.
Excited? Learning really excites you, doesn't it?
Oh yes, I think it's the actual process of broadening yourself, of knowing there's now a little extra facet of the universe you know about and can think about and can understand. It seems to me that when it's time to die, and that will come to all of us, there'd be a certain pleasure in thinking that you had utilized your life well, that you had learned as much as you could, gathered in as much as possible of the universe, and enjoyed it. Gradually managing to cram my mind more and more full of things. I've got this beautiful mind, and it's going to die, and it'll all be gone. And then I say, not in my case. Every idea I've ever had, I've written down, and it's all there on paper. And I won't be gone. It'll be there.
How do you explain yourself to yourself? What is it that caused a man to want to know so much that he would write 400 books?
Well, I suppose it's sheer hedonism. I just enjoy it so.
Pleasure.
Yes. I mean, what made Bing Crosby or Bob Hope play all that golf? You know, they enjoyed it, and that's the way it is with me.
Can we have a revolution in learning?
Yes, I think not only we can, but I think we're going to have to. As computers take over more and more of the work that human beings shouldn't be doing in the first place because it doesn't utilize their brain, it stultifies and bores them to death, there's going to be nothing left for human beings to do but the more creative types of endeavor. And the only way we can indulge in the more creative types of endeavor is to have brains that aim at that from the start. You can't take a human being and put him to work at a job that underuses the brain and keep him working at it for decades and decades and then say, well, that job isn't there, go do something more creative. You have beaten the creativity out of him. Once we have outlets, computer outlets in every home, each of them hooked up to enormous libraries where anyone can ask any question and be given answers, be given reference material, be something you're interested in knowing. From an early age, however silly it might seem to someone else, that's what you're interested in. And you ask, and you can find out, and you can follow it up. And you can do it in your own home, at your own speed, in your own direction, in your own time. Then everyone will enjoy learning. Nowadays, what people call learning is forced on you, and everyone is forced to learn the same thing on the same day at the same speed in class. And everyone is different.
For some it goes too fast, for some too slow, for some in the wrong direction. But give them a chance to follow up their own bent from the start. It's through this machine that for the first time we'll be able to have a one-to-one relationship between information source and information consumer, so to speak. Well, in the old days, you used to have tutors for children. A person who could afford it would hire a pedagogue, a tutor, and he would teach the children, and if he knew his job, he could adapt his teaching to the tastes and abilities of the students, you see. But how many people could afford to hire a pedagogue? Most children went uneducated. Then we reached the point where it's absolutely necessary to educate everybody. But the only way we could do it is to have one teacher for a great many of students, and in order to organize the situation properly, we gave them a curriculum to teach from. So how many teachers are good at this too? Like in everything else, the number of teachers is far greater than the number of good teachers. So we either have a one-to-one relationship for the very few or a one-to-many relationship for the many. Now there's a possibility of a one-to-one relationship for the many. Everyone can have a teacher in the form of access to the gathered knowledge of the human species, and it belongs to him or her. He can be the sole dictator of what he is going to learn, of what he is going to study. He's got to look forward to the fun in life, which is following his own bent.
It's not just for the young, is it?
No, that's a good point. No, it's not just for the young. That's another trouble with education as we now have it. It is for the young, and people think of education as something that they can finish. And what's more, when they finish, that's a rite of passage into manhood.
Real world.
Right.
I've
finished with school. I'm no more a child. And therefore, anything that reminds you of school, reading books, having ideas, asking questions, that's kid stuff. Now you're an adult, you don't do that sort of thing anymore, you see?
And in fact, like prison, the reward of school is getting out.
Exactly.
Kids begin to say, when you're getting out.
And every kid knows that. Every kid knows the only reason he's in school is because he's a kid and little and weak. Well, what's wrong with it is you have everybody looking forward to no longer learning, and you make them ashamed afterwards of going back to learning. If you have something like this, then anyone, any age, can learn by himself, can continue to be interested. There's no reason then, if you enjoy learning, why you should stop at a given age. People don't stop things they enjoy doing just because they reach a certain age. Make it possible for them to enjoy learning, and they'll keep it up. There's the famous story about Oliver Wendell Holmes, who lived to be well into his 90s. He was in the hospital one time. He had not long to live. He was over 90 already. And President Roosevelt came to see him. And there was Oliver Wendell Holmes reading a Greek grammar. And Roosevelt said, "Why are you reading a Greek grammar, Mr. Holmes?" And Mr. Holmes said, "To improve my mind, Mr. President."
Mysticism. What bothers you about mysticism?
Well, the same thing bothers me about mysticism that would bother me about con men. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be right to sell a person phony stock and take money for it. And this is what mystics are doing. They're selling people phony knowledge and taking money for it. And even if people feel good about it, I can well imagine that a person who really believes in astrology is going to have a feeling of security because he knows that this is a bad day, so he'll stay at home. But nevertheless, a guy who's got phony stock may look at it and it's nice and shiny and scrolls and all gold lettering and stuff, and as long as he doesn't have to do anything with it, he feels real rich looking at it. But that's no excuse. He still has phony stock. And the person who buys mysticism still has phony knowledge. And it bothers me.
Do you have any personal desire to go into space? So hopeful that we will colonize space within the next 100 years. Personally, do you want to go there?
No, I'm a signpost. I point the way. I don't go anywhere. I mean, I don't even have this urge to go into an airplane or to see Grand Canyon or anything. As a matter of fact, I'm a Manhattanite. I'm not only a Manhattanite, but deep down within me, I feel that I don't want to be anywhere but Manhattan. Occasionally I leave Manhattan, but it's never voluntarily.
If you, this is another personal question, hypothetically, could have lived at any other totally different time in history, when would that have been?
Oh, the tendency is to live in the golden age of Athens, so you can know Greek and hear Aeschylus's plays and Sophocles and Euripides in the original Greek when they're done, attending.
Opening night.
Right.
Yeah.
The only thing is, you know, the ancient Greek civilization was based on slavery. And a relatively small percentage of the population were true citizens. Most of the people were peasants, slaves, who didn't have much of a chance at education. And I have a feeling, I go back there all set to chew the fat with Socrates, and I'd find I'm a slave working there on a farm or something.
When you look at the people that have influenced you, who's had the most influence?
Well, aside from my father and mother.
Your father and mother.
Yeah, well, John Campbell, he was the editor of Astounding Science Fiction from 1938 to 1971.
Astounding Science Fiction.
Right,
Yeah.
and I brought in my first story on June 17th, 1938. He'd only been the editor for a few months, and he took me in hand for some reason. And in a sense, jollied me along, made sure I kept my nose stuck to the grindstone, encouraged me, discussed my stories with me, and to coin a phrase, made me what I am today. He saw something in me that maybe I might not have seen in myself.
What do you want people to say about you? Do you want them to say he was prolific, he was prophetic, or do you care about them saying, here is a great writer, here's a craftsman of the language?
Oh, I doubt that anyone will ever say I'm a great writer. I hope they say, here's one fellow who got a lot of pleasure out of writing.